safety from the outside world, and in all that time the main requirements haven't changed all that much. The best places to live are near supplies and services, but for a variety of reasons some people choose to go against the grain. Prepare yourself for precarious structures and homes in the most inhospitable places imaginable as we take a look at the top 15 riskiest house locations. Number 15. Rock in a river. In the middle of the Drina River, which flows near to the town of Bina Bašta in Serbia, there's a small cabin built upon a rocky outcrop that's in such a risky location that it's had to be rebuilt at least 7 times. The first structure was put there in the 1960s when a group of swimmers who regularly visited the stretch of the river wanted shelter. They used boats and kayaks to transport light materials to the rock, and it soon became a popular place for the youth of the area to meet up. Rising river levels at certain times of the year soon showed how precarious a place this was for a building, though, and it would regularly sweep all the pieces away. Each time it was destroyed, the hut was rebuilt with even stronger materials to the point where the river's water could carry it away in one single piece, which meant on several occasions people were able to catch it and drag it back up the river to the rock. In 1999, it was destroyed for a 5th time and rebuilt a few years later, but again it was washed away, and in 2011 the decision was made to finally make a design that incorporated concrete pillars. This new hut is still standing, but based on past experiences, it's surely only a matter of time until the river reclaims the rock once more. Number 14. An active volcano. Communities have for a long time often built their homes near to volcanoes because the material that's deposited during an eruption causes the land to be extremely fertile for growing crops. There is an ever-present danger, though, especially if the volcanoes are still active, and that's a daily risk faced by around 200,000 residents of the island of Java. They live around Mount Merapi, which is a stratovolcano that's the most active in Indonesia. It's regularly erupted since the 16th century, with more than 60 events in the past 500 years. It's not unusual to see smoke emerging from the mountaintop, and there are regular alerts, which causes the evacuation of thousands of people, just in case the volcano does indeed release molten lava and dangerous fumes. The last significant eruption to take place was in March of 2021, and fortunately on this occasion, the injuries were kept to a minimum. The government is now so concerned about the potential loss of life that they've designated a region around the volcano where it's illegal to live. But this is far from comprehensive, and many people still have homes within the potential impact zone. Number 13. A cliff face. The Spanish city of Cuenca has been inhabited since at least the times of the Romans, and it's on a cliff face above a river valley that used to be an important strategic position. Of course, there's far less risk of having to defend against marauding barbarians in current times, but the city still has around 50,000 residents, some of whom live in the famous hanging houses. Built above a rock on the cliff face above the Huecar River Gorge, structures like these were once commonplace in the region, with the first ones believed to have been built in the 15th century. Using traditional construction techniques, they are made completely of wood that's secured to the cliff with a series of ropes and hooks, and have been used as homes, government buildings, and even as restaurants. Quite why this became popular isn't entirely clear, but it's thought that they were the result of a lack of space on the hilltop, the only way that poorer members of society could afford a home near to the rest of the city. Now, they're one of the most popular tourist sites in the area, with millions of photos taken each year, but you surely have to have a head for heights and be willing to take a risk if you ever set foot inside one. Number 12. The Scottish Wilderness. The Scottish Highlands are regularly subjected to grueling weather conditions that blanket the countryside in snow or soak it so thoroughly that it's impossible to travel anywhere. So historically, the only people that would live in extremely remote regions were those that needed to in order to tend to their land. The Lagangra hut is a perfect example of this and was first built a few hundred years ago in the valley of the River Kupal. It was originally a crofting home where the family that lived there would produce enough food to support themselves and earn a small wage by making the day-to-day long trip to the nearest town to sell it. Made from thick stone to help withstand the powerful winds, it's now owned and maintained by the Scottish Mountaineering Club, and it's used as a resting point for climbers venturing deeper into the mountains. Still featuring the Balachulish slate roof that was installed when it was built, life there would have been incredibly tough, without any support from anyone else. Even today, it's basic living with basic electrical, heating, and cooking appliances that rely on solar power, which isn't exactly in plentiful supply with the regular storms that pass through. Number 11. A remote island. Elliday is an island that's just to the south of Iceland and is part of the Vestmannaeyjar archipelago along with 17 other small outcrops. Covering an area of around 110 acres, there's no permanent community there or anywhere close, and the only regular wildlife is a large colony of puffins. Because of its position, the island is, however, surrounded by vast quantities of aquatic life, and it used to be the perfect place for fishermen, whalers, and hunters to base themselves during parts of the year before returning to the mainland to sell what they had caught. Because of this, a small house was built on the island in what surely is one of the most remote homes on Earth. Subjected to freezing temperatures and cut off from the outside world for at least 3 or 4 months a year, not only would residents have to be happy with the extreme isolation, but if there were any emergencies, they'd have no choice but to try to deal with it themselves. Surprisingly, there was a rumor that Icelandic singer Björk now owns the building, but she's publicly denied all knowledge of this, and the current owners are believed to be a hunting organization. It's not clear how often someone's staying there, but it's hardly the most appealing lodge you could choose. Number 10. The Kachki Pillar. In the country of Georgia, close to the town of Chiatura, there's a naturally formed limestone monolith that's known as the Kachki Pillar. Rising around 130 feet or about 40 meters above the ground, there's a small platform at the top, and evidence has been found that suggests religious buildings have been present there for centuries. The current church that's there was built in the 1990s, with a restoration in 2009, and it's home to just one person, a monk of the Orthodox Church called Maxim Kavtaradze, who was once responsible for restoring the building. He only descends the pillar twice a week for supplies and spends the rest of his time in complete isolation. Researchers occasionally allowed to take a look at the ruins on the pillar, which include a medieval crypt, an ancient wine cellar, and the mysterious remains of other structures. When they do visit, they take safety precautions like using harnesses and helmets, something that the resident monk feels is unnecessary. With so little space at the top, you're less than a stone's throw away from falling off at all times, which surely must make it one of the riskiest places you could ever think of living. Seaside Bungalows. The Maldives is one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world, particularly for those looking for rest and relaxation, or who are on their honeymoon. And one of the most appealing types of rooms to stay in are those that are built on stilts and suspended over the perfectly calm ocean. This building technique is mainly used to attract the visitors, but some locals live in homes on stilts. And while this may not at first seem like too risky a place to live, the long-term prospects of the entire country aren't exactly looking promising. The islands are only just slightly above sea level, and as the waters are rising worldwide due to climate change, it may not be long until they're fully submerged. Current estimates that the average sea level will have increased by 23 inches by the end of the century would be more than enough to cover the 200 islands that make up the Maldives. Your home on stilts may not be completely swallowed by the ocean, but with no land masses for hundreds of miles in any direction, it may not be the most practical of places to live. Number 7. A precarious rock face. Located against a cliffside in the Paro Valley of Bhutan, Parotaksang is one of the most precarious buildings you'll see anywhere in the world. Also known as the Tiger's Nest, it's a Buddhist monastery that was first built in the mid-17th century. Consisting of 4 main temples and residential buildings, the structure is actually built on a series of ledges and into the network of caves that formed naturally in the cliff face. Despite these seemingly sturdy foundations, it's at an altitude of about 10,240 feet, and there's a 3,000-foot vertical drop in front of it to the base of the Paro Valley. It seems so stuck onto the ledge that it's often said to cling onto the mountainside like a gecko, and is amazingly home to a permanent group of monks. The region is a highly spiritual place, and is where Guru Padmasambhava meditated and practiced with his students in the caves. And still to this day, it's the most important of all the 13 so-called Tiger Lair caves that they visited. It's definitely a good thing that they practice a calm and peaceful existence, because if you make just one wrong move at any point on the approach to the monastery, or when you're there, you'd almost certainly fall off. Number 6. Foundations of wood. As construction techniques have developed, it's become possible to build taller and taller structures, but there's a reason why architects have to be qualified and construction crews have to meticulously follow the plans, because it only takes a small mistake to completely jeopardize the stability of a building. The Sutyagan house is proof of this, and from the moment the first stages were built, it looks like a death trap. It was the home of Nikolai Sutyagin, a notorious Russian crime lord who used his ill-gotten gains to buy the materials needed to build a house in Russia. made entirely from wood. It was just 2 stories tall, but he kept adding more and more until it had a total of 13 floors. By this time, it was 144 feet tall, and bearing in mind he had no prior knowledge of construction, there were serious concerns about its safety, not just for those living inside, but for anyone passing by. It took 15 years to complete, but fell into a state of disrepair after Sutyagin was sent to prison and was unable to keep up the required maintenance. By 2008, it had been declared a fire hazard, and despite local authorities overseeing the majority of the structure being demolished, so it was only 4 stories tall, it was eventually destroyed when it caught fire in 2012. Number 5. Lake Kivu. Throughout history, people have often set up communities around lakes. They are a great source of water and more easily defendable, and usually offer stunning views. But there's one place where the shoreside residents are taking an almighty risk with their lives. Lake Kivu, which is on the border between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. It's regarded as one of the great African lakes. At 55 miles long and 30 miles wide, it has for a long time provided the local population and supported a thriving fishing industry. The lake, however, is above a site of volcanic activity and has been found to contain a huge quantity of methane. Studies around the shoreline have found that it appears as if a localized mass extinction has occurred every 1,000 years or so, which is believed to be the result of what's known as an outgassing event, whereby odorless and colorless gas is released from the lake and deprives humans and animals of oxygen. The problem with lakes like this is that it's virtually impossible to predict when it might happen again, and it could be as long as several hundred years or as soon as in the next few hours. For the moment, attempts are being made to reduce the risk, with methane extraction platforms taking the gas away from the lake bed. But the sheer volume that's present means that this is barely scratching the surface, and it's most likely that the lake will release its methane within our lifetimes. And for anyone that's unfortunate enough to be nearby when it happens, it'll almost certainly be fatal. Number 4. Sandstone Pillars. Greece is home to a rich and vibrant cultural history, as well as vast regions of geographical beauty, and these 2 elements combine in the center of the country around the Pindos Mountains. It's there that you'll find a series of naturally formed sandstone pillars known as the meteora, a name that means lofty and elevated. Formed over thousands of years, the pillars have vertical edges and small platforms at the top, and it's there that members of the Eastern Orthodox Church built a series of monasteries. During the 16th century, there were as many as 24 of the structures in the region, and while this number has now dropped to 6, the ones that remain are some of the most precarious and risky structures you could visit. It's not just their position on top of the pillars, but the cut steps, rickety bridges, and the walkways that you need to traverse to get to them in the first place, and for a long time was purposefully difficult so those who made it to the top had proven themselves to God. Now things are a bit easier to allow visitors and tourists to access the monasteries, but there are still plenty of people who turn back because of the frightening heights that are involved. 2 of the monasteries are inhabited by nuns, while the other 4 are home to the monks, and in total the Meteora has a permanent population of 56 people. Number 3. A tiny island. Also known as Hub Island, the appropriately named Just Room Enough Island is part of the Thousand Islands chain in New York, and holds the record for being the smallest inhabited island in the world. Covering an area of just 3,300 square feet, it was originally bought by the Sizeland family in the 1950s, and they built a house on it to act as a getaway from the pressures of city life. Today, the house is still very much the same as it was then, with a small beach, a tree, and a few other plants that have been put there by owners over the years. On the face of it, it's an ideal escape, but there's a very real and present risk with staying at a place like this. The first, of course, is the chance that the water levels will rise and flood the property, and while that's yet to happen, despite the house being there for almost 70 years, it's likely that it will one day flood. The other risk of living there is the lack of access. The only way to reach it is by boat, and even from the shore of the mainland, it's a significant distance to emergency services or stores, so if any accidents happen on the island, there's very little support available. Number 2. Base of a volcano. Airbnb has given homeowners the chance to share their properties with the world, and while most that are available are in convenient places with all the modern luxuries you'd expect, there are some that are in more unusual places. One of the ones that have garnered the most attention in recent years is called the Phoenix House, which just so happens to be at the base of the Kilauea volcano on Hawaii's Big Island. As a volcanically active region, Kilauea continuously releases lava, and this house is so close to the flow that it has a stunning view of steam that's produced as the molten rock reaches the ocean. Even though it's around 4 miles away from actual lava, there's always the possibility that there will be new flows that develop, or a full eruption, and anyone that's in the house at the time wouldn't stand a chance of escaping. If you think the risk is worth it, however, then the Phoenix house has a modern design and is the ideal retreat. It isn't connected to the grid and there's no internet access, but it does provide electricity from solar panels, and water's provided from the rainwater collector. It's a back-to-basics life in luxurious surroundings, but you'd best keep an eye on the latest advice from the USGS, just in case the volcano's being more active than usual. Number 1. Minchin County. The world is continually changing and always has gone through various geological processes. Ice sheets carve new canyons and valleys, oceans erode the shorelines, and volcanoes can even create new land masses. But one of the more unusual and potentially life-altering processes is the expansion of a desert. It's something that happens because of changes in long-term weather conditions and can see a once fertile place covered in sand and heat in just a matter of years. In fact, the largest deserts on Earth used to be covered in fertile jungle, and if you lived in the wrong place, you could well find your home is about to suffer the same fate. That's exactly what residents in Minchin County in China are facing. It's a place that's been inhabited for hundreds of years, thanks to the Xiang River that passes through the valley. But human activity has begun to severely alter conditions. A huge amount of irrigation upstream now means that very little water actually makes it as far down the river as used to be the case, and this is causing the region to dry up. Groundwater levels have severely depleted, and the nearby desert is beginning to approach, leaving the more than 200,000 residents no option but to try to install devices to hinder its progress. Not only is it likely to fully become a desert within a matter of decades, which will result in all the homes having to be abandoned, but is now the main source of sandstorms in the whole of China, which are responsible for a huge amount of damage and disruption further afield. Watch our nature playlist for more top 15 videos about beautiful nature. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best nature videos.